my computer. There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to TSQA. It's time for the TSQA Meetup. This is not an April Fool's joke. This is technically the March Meetup. We will be actually having an April Meetup at the end of April. Susan is going to be talking about managing quality assurance people and how you can do that better. It's going to be super fun. We're super excited about that. But what we're incredibly excited about is we have a special guest speaker all the way from 11 p.m. her time. We've got Maaret. Please take it away.
It's actually with daylight savings time, it's now midnight, and it's no longer April Fool's Day, so you're not allowed to try doing that to me. I am already on the 2nd of April, so that's my schedule. I'm one of those who can't deal with the daylight saving time changes. Apparently, I have no idea what time it is after this happens, and I have no clue in advance that this would happen, so I can't do anything. But the good thing is tomorrow, well, today is a free day from work, so I can actually sleep late, so I'm okay being up a little later and having a conversation with you. So into the agenda of the day, let's find the thing here. I have so many windows again. You should be seeing my screen, I hope.
Looks great.
All right. So I have this bad habit, or maybe it's a good habit, but I have this habit of almost never doing exactly same presentations. There's similar elements to a lot of my presentations, but I create them, I deliver them once, and then there's way too many topics that I kind of want to think through and summarize. That's how I use the presentations in general, kind of like they are my way of thinking how I would express my thoughts on a particular topic. So this is something that I haven't presented anywhere before. And this is something that kind of probably would have never been born unless Jenny was saying that on a particular day when I was trying to figure out something related to pipelines, that she needed people to speak in this meetup. And I kind of, in the whim of the moment, I just kind of raised my virtual hand and said like, well, I could actually do something. And she picked this topic. So that's why this now then exists. I can see there's some things on the chat. Okay, I maybe shouldn't be looking at that. Jenny, please let me know if there's something to see on the chat. I'll try to keep kind of like pauses every now and then so that we can have a bit of a conversation instead of me just, speaking all by myself here. I'm from Finland, meaning that it's very late for me. But also in Finland, I work for a company, Vaisala. We do basically measurement software. So currently I work with weather and environmental metrics measurements and create systems around those. But I have had this history in general where I don't stay very long in a single company. I've been in the industry for 5 years, but usually I spend 2, 3, 4 years in a company. And I have had this common theme in general of going into different companies, trying to figure out, I originally thought I'm trying to figure out what is context-driven testing, how to test in different contexts. But over time, I've noticed that instead of so much of the testing, well, of course, testing is still a theme that I work on a lot. I find that I'm going to companies and I'm introducing continuous delivery, continuous deployment, continuous quality, continuous whatever practices, because just doing things in the end doesn't seem like the thing to do anymore. But today, what I wanted to kind of talk about is this idea of exploring pipelines. So basically, I'm putting together two of my favorite things that I do right now. Exploratory testing, what that is about, and the pipeline related practices. So let's see how that flows for today. So let's start with this idea. I'm not responding to my clicks. Now it's coming. hopefully not going too far away. All right, so exploratory testing is this idea where you don't separate test design and test execution. You rather interlay and intertwine them with the idea when you don't separate them, you can do as much of learning as possible. So you do something, test something, you look at the results, whatever you're seeing, whatever you're experiencing, whatever that has going on inside your head, and you ask yourself, what am I learning? What is that going to change in the way that I would do next if I had a full choice? You tell yourself you have a full choice for your next test, and you change the next tests that you will do based on the learning that just happened. For something like that to happen, something like that I would call exploratory testing, the prerequisite that needs to be in place is that the people who are doing testing, people like myself, people like my colleagues, they need to have agency, this idea of being self-organized, self-managed, in the sense of they're allowed to make their own choices. So it's not something you inject from the outside by someone else giving you a test design or a specific thing that you need to do, but it's that you're discovering you are in control of, and the way what we look for in exploratory testing in general is more impactful results. So we are looking at how much time, how much money do we have to spend on doing something so that we get the results that we want in the best possible way, as in best possible way as in optimizing those so that they are as impactful and a good use of time as they possibly can. And this is the style of testing that I've loved and adored and really put a lot of focus on learning over the last 25 years. And it's been around longer than I've been in the industry. I was just checking before this meetup that 1984 was the first published mentions of exploratory tests by Ken Kainer. And we've really figured out what this is about in the community ever since, but also kind of like figuring out it a little bit more. It's still not completely done, even though the concept has been around for quite some time. Ken Kainer originally defined this as something where these two activities are intertwined and the learning is happening, but also he described it as skilled exploratory, skilled testing that is multidisciplinary, meaning a lot of the things around exploratory testing were things like, people who know legal aspects would have different perspectives to testing. Sociology was probably something that would be relevant. Psychology is very relevant. Finances, if we're talking about using time being money, opportunity cost, all that sort of things, all of that was really, really relevant to exploratory testing. So kind of like putting different disciplines together, having this overall perspective and trying to figure out how to build software that would have good quality through giving feedback on the things that might be either going wrong in the future or already have gone wrong. So it's not just limited on the time that we have the software available, but we can do it kind of throughout the project in many ways. So in this whole scenario of exploratory testing, we often then end up kind of comparing exploratory testing to automation. So we talk about the manual testing, which is kind of, exploratory testing is a fancier way for a lot of people to say manual testing. And then we think of like automated testing as something that you really can't automate the execution part of exploring because you're supposed to be learning, which is not quite actually true. The manual and the automated part of test execution, since you're putting together test design and test execution, even if you had automated parts of your exploratory testing or test execution, you could still be, looking at the results on fairly regular interval and asking yourself the very same question that you needed to ask on exploratory testing. What am I learning? What am I going to do differently based on whatever results I'm getting from this current execution? So I see this at my office a lot. I was just watching this one colleague of mine doing some, we call it bootstrapping, connecting to the server that we have, getting an identity, getting started, having certificates, kind of a two-way handshake type of a thing to get into a new connection for a device. And what he basically did, the way he was exploratory testing, is that every single night he left his computer running to do that thing again and again and again with a little bit different variables. And every single morning he started spending the whole of his day into figuring out what the results were that he put on a file, could do some searches on, could find some patterns on, and based on what he found on that day, the next day he could use a little bit different set of variables so that he could learn still more about changing of the software or about understanding the problems that we were seeing. So definitely still exploratory testing, even though automation was a major part. So I don't think this test execution part it makes the difference here. Then on the test design part, well, clearly this manual, or like I learned last week, people saying manual work, that's kind of on the bigger side on the test design, but also having done things like model-based testing or drawing basically a visual, well, a particular visual about the system, about the interactions, and then you have a way of hooking automation into that test design so that it creates you automatically different kinds of walks through your system, or using design ideas like random data and just running the same kind of things with various data, or thinking around like wanting to cover different browsers. There's actually always also an automated aspect to the test design part, even in exploratory testing. So we really shouldn't be separating these two. So the way I see it is that instead of thinking that exploratory testing somehow would separate kind of to the manual side and the automated side is somehow different, I believe that in the modern world, I call this contemporary perspective to exploratory testing a lot. In the modern world, what we need to think of is solving testing problems in the same way as we couldn't, because of agency enabling learning, we couldn't separate the test design and the test execution. We actually can't also separate the manual parts and the automated parts of these two activities. Otherwise, we won't be getting the impactful results that is still kind of the core of exploratory testing. So all of this is kind of, giving you the idea of why do I go and talk about this idea of exploratory pipelines and how is exploratory testing coming into this picture. So for me, a lot of the work that I do in office is around the idea that I don't want to spend hours anymore. I've used way too many hours of my working days in arguing whether something can or can't be automated. And a lot of times, we could have tried in the same time of arguing. And sometimes, I've had these cases where when giving up on the arguing and going into let's try doing it, we've maybe not been able to build the thing that I originally thought can't be built. But we've been able to build something different that is actually giving us a lot of value when we go into rather, seeing how far we can go and figuring out, again, learning layer by layer, what kind of things we could do. And this type of mindset has really led me into the idea of using this mindset on pipelines. And that's what I really wanted to kind of talk about today. But before we dive into the pipelines, I still have this one more thing that I wanted to mention. So I told you I've been working on technology for 25 years. And I remember I actually can go back and watch videos of me talking about testing 10 years ago in particular. And people would ask me if I write code and if I automate. Well, I have a computer science background from a university, so that kind of hints that I should probably have earlier already, but I wasn't. I had so much work to do on learning to be really good at learning domains. getting fast at understanding the general concepts of how does a risk happen, what kind of risks happen in a particular domain, how to interview people to get that information out, working with requirements, implicit requirements in particular, and turning that into something actionable that I can use as a tester. I also obviously had to learn things around operating systems. So running things in production, deploying things into production, making sure that nothing gets deployed without us knowing. Otherwise, we would get these surprises. So kind of like announcement type of services. So I had to work a lot on that side. And for me, in my 25 years, this idea of becoming or finding the identity that I actually should have had all along. I started programming when I was, I think, 13 or 14. Realizing that I, spending more time on that reason, but I already was spending time on that, but I never stayed on a single language. So I was kind of grown over the years into this polyglot multi-language type of world. You won't have that necessarily on your year 1, but it's kind of reasonable to expect that you could have that on your year 25, like where I'm now. And also, I've worked in the engineering management side. I've been the boss of developers as well as the boss of testers. Now I'm a principal test engineer, so definitely not a manager right now. But still, the communication, feedback, people, organizing, whatever skills that I learned holding those other roles, they will always follow me when I'm doing exploratory testing, being in that role in the companies. So while me, 25 years of experience, can have all of these different areas in some kind of shape, I also recognize that there's still plenty to learn. No one will know the entire area of software development. I have also plenty of great colleagues. I have colleagues who have less experience than me, and yet they are better in some of the areas than I am, and the other way around. So always there's things where we can kind of fill in the gaps that the other ones have and don't have. So it's teamwork. So rather than thinking of it as in it's looking at something for like exploratory testing being something that just happens by a single person, you can keep the agency around having these different skills. Idea of if you don't know something, you just don't know something yet. So there's always a second day. I put in a content warning if food and animals is a thing for you. You might want to give a minute of not kind of watching the next picture, but I wanted to give like a metaphor example here. The way I think of exploratory testing, and especially why and how it relates to automation and automating pipelines, is this idea, if you have meat of different kind, the more valuable meat tends to be the one where the grease is equally divided. The Japanese special meat has quite a different price range than the regular US beef that I took a picture of. And this is the type of way that I think of about exploratory testing, that it's actually the way of designing creation of software and feedback in the software systems so that we have it equally divided in the right places so that we create more value. So let's talk about then pipelines. On the pipelines, the kind of like, well, I wanted to start with this idea of what they are. And for me, looking at pipelines, what I usually see in my organizations is, well, Jenkins, Circle CI, the one that starts with C that I can't pronounce right now. Multiple various systems. Recently, it's been AWS code pipelines. It's in the GitLab pipelines, all different kinds of tools. But I'm not actually taking a very tool-specific approach to exploring a pipeline. I'm taking more of this social, organizational, socio-technical approach to pipelines. And the way that I look at pipelines is that I think of them as us having pieces of automation, and we have other automation that connects those pieces. And that's basically what we call a pipeline. So a lot of times when we start building test automation at first, I think we're actually exploring all the way when we are doing test automation. It might start with writing a single line that does some testing for us. Well, if we're smart, it definitely starts with making sure we can see that it can fail before we go much further, making sure all of our tools work and our expectations of the tools are in place. But then kind of getting into these ideas of implementing the first test, maybe doing the same test, but now using variables so that you can use different data values more easily. You don't have to write various scripts. Maybe you can do the same test even and make it a template so you can kind of make it even more concise in the way that you structure your tests. Maybe you'll end up even exploring with automation and finding a bug. You need to decide what you will do with that bug, whether you will leave that test case, automated test, around that you documented already, or whether you will turn it off. Because if you have a failing test, putting a failing test into a pipeline is going to stop your pipeline. So you need to make those choices when you are kind of going about designing for the pipelines. You probably are going to look through whatever requirements your organization has whatever specifications you're seeing. So you're going to put all of that together into your documentation. So again, if I write test cases, they tend to be in the form of automating. You're probably going to guess some of the values that are likely to fail and maybe even put some of that in information. Maybe you'll try out multiple browsers if it's a browser-based thing, but none of this actually says that you have to put any of this test automation yet into a pipeline on a regular basis in a continuous integration system. You could just run it on your computer. It is already test automation as such, but it's not doing much of the work unless you are commanding it. And kind of like you're available to drive it. So definitely still part of doing that exploring. So I took then here kind of like out of that a picture, an example of creating something in this format through exploring, creating test automation code. This piece of code is just very simple one on a little app that we've been testing with in pairs with some people. And you can kind of see there from the lines 11 to 17, there's 7 test cases of different values. Test names are not very descriptive, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on, are not maybe the best names that you can give things. And but it still kind of gives you an idea of what do I by the template tests, different values, same test in the background, giving you the possibility to explore. But again, now I have one test number 6 here is actually failing. And if it's failing, I need to turn it off before I can put it into my pipeline to do any test automation running work as part of that pipeline. So if I would put that in the pipeline while it's failing, I would probably get a radiator, the view into the team, the view that managers in our organization at least see when they pass us by, the colors, and we've been trying to teach them to see either green or blue. In my previous organization, it was always blue. It took me 4 years to learn to say blue, and now in my new organization, it's always green, and it's probably going to take me a few years to say green because, well, we use these both colors to indicate this idea. But I took a picture today. This is today from one project that actually isn't my project, which is also one of the reasons why I hid all the details of names of the product. But you really shouldn't be seeing these type of radiators that are either yellow or red. You would expect to see all of green. you would expect to see names that are meaningful so that someone passing by could understand that why are, for example, the bootstrapping related tests, that is the feature that we're working on right now, why are they either passing or failing, and getting an idea that actually helps them understand the project status rather than the other way around. So for me, this whole idea of exploring in the pipelines goes into this idea of not just taking whatever boxes we have here in the organization as a given, designing the boxes that make sense in the organization that would trigger us in our exploratory testing, in doing the right kind of exploration that would trigger us, enabling us hold that agency, the responsibility of looking at something, designing a test, and learning from the results of it, so that things need to somehow map to whatever concepts we are using in the development, rather than what right now is a little bit of the case in my current organization, why this is a theme that I'm really working on so heavily. We tend to label all of these based on resources. Embedded software means that each and every one of these is usually one embedded device, and it is reflecting often the status of that device rather than the functionalities that we would be more interested in talking about. So we bundle, not maybe in the most optimal way, and I'm looking for improvements in that. So for this idea of connecting automation with automation, pipelines really just is. I wanted to kind of introduce the four main concepts that I think that I keep running on as I try to build better pipelines from where, respecting whatever we have right now, but getting to a place where I don't want to call it refactor, but rewrite, restructure, something of that sort, that would serve us better. So instead of having only nightly feedback, we could have continuous feedback. Instead of having a summed up feedback device, we could have on each of the devices, we could see the themes that actually make sense for us. The first theme that I wanted to introduce today is this idea that when we're building the pipelines, we're really just doing scheduling. So the test automation script, the little example that I gave you here earlier, while that is something that helps us do exploratory testing and leave some documentation behind, if we don't run it on some kind of a schedule, we don't run it with some kind of a plan that matches whatever changes and whatever feedback needs we have, it's not going to do all the work for us that it could. And we have basically three main ways that we can run these little scripts in our pipeline tools. First of all, we can run things on schedule. So if you can't, sometimes, well, particularly in this project, we can't at first, if you can't run your test automation whenever a build gets generated, there's too much going on, you are limited on the resources in some way, you're not able to necessarily scale that up. Maybe finding out a scale of how often you will do this is something. We started off with, well, in the past, we started off with the nightly, and now I'm again going back to the nightly schedule in my current organization. So that's the on schedule work. On trigger is this idea that we started by something happening before this. So for example, if we had a build that got generated, there was a pull request that got merged, we would then build a build. A trigger is doing test automation after we have a new version available. And then also then the third part is we could run them, especially in cases of failure, when we've seen a fail and we want to see if things are different when we repeat things, or we have somehow managed to get in fixes that don't start a thing on a trigger, we could also do things on demand. So figuring out what's the scheduling, what's the way of running your things and getting the little script that you had already, what's the connection mechanism? is the first dimension. The second dimension is thinking kind of like what happens before and what happens after. So I find that I'm a lot of times exploring dependencies between the jobs, and I'm trying to figure out what are the things and what's the right order of things that need to happen beforehand. What do we need to wait for? What can we do side by side? And how do we time things in a proper way if we create very complicated dependencies of having things going on side by side? And designing and experimenting, trying out different ways of putting the jobs in an order that actually serves your specific need is something that I find that I'm learning a lot by exploring the pipeline that we have right now, looking at the numbers, looking at the times, looking at the fail rates, and figuring out what would be the next experiment for better from that perspective. My third dimension is visualizing. I seem to have a big favorism towards anything that draws a picture for me. So all of the tooling that draws a picture of the pipeline that we have, I have a personal favorism towards them. But also I'm noticing that whenever I am trying to figure out a new pipeline, like in a new organization or in a new team, take a piece of paper, I draw a box, I draw an arrow from the box to the next box, and I figure out in a visual format what's going on in our system. And just the visualizing act alone is often revealing me relevant aspects of that system. And then the fourth piece that I've been kind of noticing where exploring is quite relevant on pipelines is the repeatability. Maybe this is particularly now on my list of things because in the last few weeks we've been building quite a pipeline. I can't, well, I say I have hard time imagining, I can imagine, but I have hard time imagining that we could have coped with the 3 times 4 times 3 matrix of different images and signatures that we ended up having for a particular security feature that we were just implementing. But building and testing the pipeline for repeatability, being able to trust that pipeline to do the right things and only verifying things, instead of verifying every single end result, verifying and planning your pipeline testing in a way that emphasizes your trust toward repeatability. It's a really critical way of building complex things that happen the same way in a trustworthy manner time and time again. So pipelines also offer us this component of repeatability and trustworthiness in many cases. And I find that this is something where it's been really critical for me to understand. On the visualization part, you can practice visualizing. I've been trying to play this pipeline game with some of the teams. It's originally something that I saw Abby Bangster run in the European Testing Conference that I was organizing Abby was doing that one of the sessions. Emily Bage joined one of Abby's sessions and turned it into an actual card game that you can get from Pragma's website. But the idea with that game, quite simply, is thinking through the different building blocks that your pipelines can have, give you names for your options. There's almost like 50 cards of different kinds of testing that you could put in your pipeline, both manual and automated steps, and the dependencies in the pipeline, with the focus on then calculate the cost in time of running through that pipeline for any changes that you want to be deploying. So kind of founding on the idea of DevOps metrics and the observation or that usually when the lead time is shorter, it correlates heavily with business success in organizations. So I still wanted to kind of, in the end, give you 3 experiences that I didn't open up in more detail in the slides. I was thinking of how much I would put into these slides, but I just put these as kind of like placeholders for stories. So 3 last organizations that I worked with and what it was like exploring pipelines there. 2 jobs ago, I was working with an organization where we had only a single small team. I think it was 8 or 9 people in that team. I can't remember exactly anymore. But at first, we had a case where we really didn't have a coded pipeline of any sort. We would typically do releases every 3 months, and every release was really, really painful. There were smaller releases twice a year and bigger releases twice a year. And all the work was kind of built around the ways of not introducing the major changes at the wrong time, so you could still manage to make those fairly infrequent releases where all of the testing was dispersed around the organization. We got to a place by building a reliable code pipeline where we could do daily releases, and we didn't have a single automated test in that pipeline, and we were still able to do daily releases. This was something where I kind of realized that I had, somehow thought about testing as the core thing, but the core thing really was building reliable results first, and then building testing on top of that. On the second organization, the previous organization that I worked with, we had a very different way of doing things. We had really full code pipelines. I remember very enjoyable days at work where I was, following the upstream jobs and the downstream jobs and crossing over lines of one Jenkins to another, looking at really fancy multi-Jenkins visualizations of all of this, and feeling somehow in control, because the pipelines, the way we set things up, enabled us to see through version control all changes to our infrastructure, as well as to our application code, as well as to our tests. So giving that kind of like a full perspective, I still think that's maybe something that I'm aspiring for in the future. And then my current organization and my current team, I'm framing that as rebuilding through exploring. So we have working pipelines, but in particular right now, I find myself spending time in testing conversations, doing testing and having conversations based on that testing on how we could optimize things in our pipeline, how we could better deliver the information, how we could structure. So we talked about this stuff kind of already a little bit earlier. But very different organizations, very different statuses. And for me, all of this really reminds me of this idea that, future is already here. It's just equally divided. And sometimes in changing organization, you feel like you're going from the future where you were supposed to be 10 years into the past, and then you're figuring out how to get back to the future a little faster than it was possible in this organization. So to kind of conclude this, my approach of doing this is that the strategy that I use on building automation, building pipelines, is that we're doing things incrementally. They're always incomplete. We're always learning. That's why we're talking about this exploring. So we respect whatever value we have already. Something that doesn't yet work perfectly, but is already doing some of the heavy lifting for us is really good. So instead of being stuck on the planning side, we really should be continuously moving to a better place. And that's where exploring really helps us. And one of the steps on the way is this idea that we should be turning more things into code. Areti, who was in this call, I saw her talking about this idea of compliance as code. I Googled that today, and that's going to be my next thing that I want to be turning in code. There was very nice practical articles on how to do some of that. And that's kind of where I was going. Right, that's what I the presentation side. So I think now it's time for us to have a conversation.
Wow, this was really incredible. I love the idea of using exploratory testing principles to explore things that are not just testing. That's just so awesome. And the little piece you put at the end, the changing jobs feels like time travel, but not in the best way. That's absolutely one of my favorite things, and so true. Too true. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to bring up or anything they'd like to ask? Feel free to unmute yourself and just blurt it out.
I do. All right. One of the things that I love about you, and you said this in your intro as well, is that you don't like to deliver the same talk, that you want it fresh. And I'm not going to name names, but we all know that some conversations get stale virtually. What you touched on this briefly, but for everyone who's just tuning in, can you share just a little bit more about this specific topic and why this was something that you were excited to share, first off? And secondly, you do such a great job of sharing concrete examples. Jenny and I have been DMing nonstop, and it's, spoiler alert, you do such a great job of sharing concrete examples. You did this in this presentation. I talk to a lot of customers where exploratory testing is not part of their priority. So my ask is, what advice would you give me as someone who's talking to these customers, aka people that are using our product, they're people? What advice would you give to encourage their managers to explore exploratory testing? So again, one, conversation, inspiration. Number two, concrete strategies to help me help our customers, aka people, prioritize this. Thank you.
I'm probably going to have three things now already on the list.
I love.
By the time I talk about the first one, I'm going to forget the other two. So
I'll remind you.
You know, you can repeat that.
I will.
You know, that's a good conversation that way. So first of all, like what brought me into this topic is, I've been doing exploratory testing for 25 years. I learned about it from ChemK very early on in my career. And I know that there are other people who, well, basically declared deprecated all testing is exploratory. And what I'm seeing in the companies, because again, I've been working in companies, I'm not a consultant, I've always worked in a product company, well, product or a delivery company. What I'm seeing in practice is that we are still sometimes creating test cases. We are still creating that idea of like, you know, here's the test cases, you need to write them in a way where anyone can execute them. So that still happens. I thought it didn't, but it still does happen. And I've come to understand that there's kind of like, there's the exploratory testing, the noun, which is basically the frame in which organization puts your testing. You can have either not exploratory testing or have exploratory testing, the noun. And a lot of organizations don't know how to ask for exploratory testing. Like they don't understand what that would mean, which means the management and the frame is creating basically these drifting powers that are taking you away from good testing. Even if the exploratory testing, the verb would, you know, you can't really do testing really well unless you're exploring. You can't automate without exploring. You can't run a script without exploring, because you know you will get curious at some point. You will be bored at some point. That will always happen. But the organization can put you in a place where you are less likely to do that. So for me, it's really close to that I wouldn't end up in organizations like I am in now, where the organization has spent some decades in making the testers worse, as in worse by the results, as in worse by where they spend their time, and worse by, well, they are, that's not what makes them worse, but mostly it's kind of like how much effort and what are the results that you can expect out of that, all of that work. So that's kind of what drives me into still figuring this out, because I see the practical side in companies, and I think we are far from done. So that sort of leads us to the next question that you have on, like, how can we somehow get the organizations to care for this? I think we need to start with this idea that, well, like, you know, offering maybe the examples of how we could do this differently. We need to start with the idea that they probably have misconceptions right now. They probably think they've read the ISTQB syllabus, and they think exploratory testing is a technique where you kind of like, on top of all the automation that I'm supposed to have, I'm going to put this little sprinkle of automation, the little cloud on top of that triangle that I kind of like, I had a slide there, but I kind of skipped that very, very quickly over. But a lot of organizations think that's where exploratory testing ends up being. Even the modern Agile organization, they talk about PDD. They want it to happen in the most effective way possible, or actually efficient way possible, not the most effective way possible. So they need to reframe to that effectiveness and curiosity. So getting to that is kind of necessary. And then the other way that organizations sometimes see exploratory testing comes from the people who are really kind of like, there was the beginning of exploratory testing, there's the current day of exploratory testing, and then there's the middle part of exploratory testing. And the middle part is, I'm going to use the word infested, but that's how I feel about it. It's infested with session-based test management. And that's actually not doing a service for really good exploratory testing. It creates a frame in which really bad organizations give us space, and they could actually give us the full agency that we need in order to do the good job. So I think the middle part, where we really focused on how we manage it with these sessions, was creating a worse atmosphere for the right kind of testing to grow. So I believe that the way that the organizations will change in this is by people who are doing things differently, again, kind of reforming a community of some sort and sharing these stories of how are things different. Stopping the eternal fight of automation versus exploratory, because that's ridiculous. That has nothing to do with the real life and practicality. Like, that's not the discussion we should be having. We should be having a discussion about what we can't yet automate and how we could help that in some way. And you know, we do some of that part manually. We create the automation manually. and we'll do some of that part by repeating like it as if it was manual labor. But that's not the point of it. The point of it is we're trying to discover ways of doing software so that feedback is you know, really intertwined into the whole being of us creating that software in the teams. And also, out of the misconceptions, I think the idea that developers aren't doing exploratory testing really needs to go away. Some of the best exploratory testers are programmers, the developers that I work with. Given a full week of not having to try to crunch code, they do magic on the testing side. So again, it's a self-created thing where we say that they can't do it, so we don't give them the time to practice, and they can't do it because of that. So I think this is it's an area where we just need to talk more about the experiences and the ideas, and it's a community effort. That's how I feel about it.
I have to say, I know that I'm not facilitating this conversation, Jenny. I will shut up in 2 seconds, I promise. Susan, yeah, you know, I love your lighting. You're literally taking us to church. Like you're literally taking us all to church, like everyone. Like this is a rallying cry. I've taken a lot of notes. I do have just really fast, quick question. Well, first it's a comment. This idea of like the testing pyramid is dead, right? Like that, like Josh Grant, my boo that I recruited over at Sauce, like I get it, controversial, blah, 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 blah. I think that there is an opportunity here for you in your amazing award-winning blogs to visualize this pyramid. Visualize a little bit more from an exploratory lens. So I'd love to see something in the future. Y'all heard it here first. I would love, 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 love to see this visualization from you because this is powerful, and I want to use whatever tools that you provide in the future to bring back to my customers that don't know and they don't have the language to bring it back to the upper management. Your blogs are incredible, and having an asset like this would be so helpful for me and the people that I serve. So that was really, really, really helpful. I'm going to go backwards against Maxine Waters and say I am unclaiming my time because I have more questions, and I will not do that right now because there are people. But my one ask is that you visualize this in a blog in the future. I really, really would love that. Like, it would mean a lot. You are a freaking celebrity. Like, this would mean a lot. That's all. Done.
I'm not a celebrity, but
You
regardless,
are,
thank you.
but you are. You won an award.
Not,
You won a really, really, you won many awards,
I,
but you won a really
you
big
know,
award. This is a big
I,
deal here.
I like my work, and I love the fact that we have so many smart people in the community to figure this out together. So if anyone wants to try visualizing this with me, just ping me after. I love pair work, so that's always good.
Yeah, I think that's also something that is really important. If you do have questions afterwards, she's very accessible. I mean, I got her to talk at TSQA across the ocean. She didn't even have to jump on a plane. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to pose or any comments?
I'd like to play off of something that you just said in your answer to Tristan, Maaret, that I've been thinking about too, is this sort of, this notion of devs as testers, another, sort of controversial sort of thing. Some of it is around, I think what you said is about creating space for them to have time to actually do these things. And I think that's a bigger challenge than ability or aptitude towards it, or that we have some secret knowledge that we must transmute to one another in order to be able to perform this function with some discipline or something. And so I'm just kind of a similar question, but were developers doing exploratory testing at your company before you arrived, or was this an initiative that you had to advocate for? And I'm curious, if the devs weren't doing it before, how did they first respond to that? And what was that experience like?
So I can look at 3 companies that I've been to in the last years. The first company, the developers would absolutely not test. There was a project manager who created test cases. I think it was 41 page, one of the specifications was 41 pages of text, where there were 5 pieces of information that I didn't know on my week 1 when I was reading that specification as a new employee. So I had to read all of that text, and I read it multiple times because I was so amazed on how much empty text someone can create. So if you make your developers test with that kind of test cases, most likely they will be testing, and they don't want to do any of that. They will have that idea that they don't want to, this is not for us. It requires something we don't have. So taking away that of practices that make testing not fun is a really core thing for developers in general. So I paired with them, I made space for them, I worked with the managers on making sure they were not asked anymore to show the details. And even though I had these conversations where managers were convinced that, the project manager in particular was convinced that everyone must hate testing. So if you don't, if you tick at least 4 test cases a day, you're probably not doing anything. You're just going to have a coffee full day. But, you know, we have these concepts still, like they still happen in real life. In my current job, there are still people who are thinking that they don't want to do testing because there's this compliance related testing that we need to do, which needs to generate particular type of documentation, and they don't care for that. So just saying there's other kinds was enough, and then they were volunteering. So it was kind of they opting out because they were thinking it must mean I have to do that. And in the middle company, they were doing it already before. But then again, I was in that company already 10 years ago before. So this was my second time in that company. So I might have already left something behind 10 years ago. So it's for me to say where they got that, but the sense of ownership, really, you know, having that agency of your product, it makes you feel like you want to know how it works, and it means you will be testing it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's also one of the challenges, is that sometimes developers are kept in their own silos, or teams in general are kept in their own silos, to where they might not have a broad knowledge of the product that they're working on, and only this small slice. And so I think it's also important to make sure that folks know what the thing is that they're building and know how it works. And surprise, most of them are actually interested in learning that. It's just that they haven't had opportunities to.
And again, the middle company, the one that I was with before this one, we were doing things like no product owner. We had no product owner. We talked directly to customers. Every single person in the team. We had lunch with the customers regularly. We just picked different people, and salespeople made the direct introductions. We were doing no estimates. We were delivering to 1.8 million customers on bi-weekly basis, installing on people's personal computers as part of continuous delivery. So, like you can do quite amazing things when you have people who want to solve these problems. So for me, maybe the main thing that I've kind of taken out of all of this is the belief that there is always better, even for the really good team. There is still always better, and just appreciating what you have today, but not accepting it is the core to making things better for the future.
Thank you.
Love that. Does anyone else have any questions that they'd like to pose?
Don't you dare. There are so many questions here. There are so many questions here. I'm not even
It's also like 1 a.m. her time, so be kind.
Well, that's what I was just going to say, is thank you so much for coming on our time schedule. I am just, I think it's so great that we have this world society that we can get you over the internet and feel like you're just maybe in the house around the corner. It's so great to have you. Thank you for making time for us. And I know it is late, so extra thanks.
I know Penny has questions. Come on, Penny.
I am up already. I don't need to go to sleep right now. I am here with you. So if you have anything you want to ask or have a conversation on, now is your chance. Like, I'm not going to fall asleep in the middle of a conversation. That never happens. So
I don't want to speak for, and thank you for that. I don't want to speak for Penny, but Penny is a dear friend of mine, and I love her. And there's big things coming for Penny in 2021. I have a question for Penny as stage mom, self-proclaimed. What advice would you give to rising leaders about, one, improving their brand and making it well known, and number two, creating authentic messaging that will resonate with others? So again, what advice do you have for others about elevating their professional brand? And number two, what advice do you have for them getting on a public stage and sharing their knowledge in an authentic way?
So I'm not big on building a brand.
It's a lot.
I care for integrity, and I care a lot for thinking through my own values on what's important to me, and like how I want to show up, and paying attention, kind of like, from a third person perspective, kind of like having someone, second person of me watching over what I do. And me being authentic means that I've had to work through these ideas of what does being kind mean to me. How do I show up in a way that is kind, in the way that I understand kind? And I believe that instead of building a brand, it's better to, find out who you are and try to look at the way you behave, in respect to whatever you were thinking you are. And again, you can hear the feedback as well on what is going on. Caring for creating a brand or having a presence, I find that it's more stressful than what it should be, and I don't really want to pay attention to that. I'm just grateful for example, for Twitter, for hiding the numbers of how many followers you have, because it was really making me nervous seeing whatever I said, whether I was gaining followers or losing them. Now I don't see it, and I'm okay with that. So again, be careful in trying to please others. It's a very easy thing for many of the people to do. So rather than building a brand, just show up as your true self. But on getting on a stage, I believe that that's not about building a brand. That's about figuring out, it's kind of like giving yourself an avenue to other people. That's what speaking in public is about. It's not that you have something necessarily that is so awesome that no one in the world has it. Maybe you will eventually have that, that's fine as well. But you have your own experiences, no matter what level you are, no matter where you are. And people are interested in sharing learning about other people's experiences. So for me, this whole public speaking journey, I make these numbers of how many talks I've given. I think this is somewhere around 430 something. I have no idea anymore. But I started off with someone who was afraid of public speaking. I would almost pass out having to, introduce myself in my 20s something.
That
So
was recent, right?
that's really recent, yes, like almost yesterday.
I just wanted to double check because it felt, yeah.
Yeah, but again, for me, this whole public speaking started with this idea that I don't want to have a limitation in my professional career, and not being able to communicate with others, not being able to share my ideas would be a limitation. So have to do something of that. So I took a job where I was forced on a stage in front of a kind audience, also a audience that didn't have a choice.
Captive audience, yes.
Yeah, very, very captivating. They wouldn't pass their course if they didn't participate in my lectures. So I use that as my platform of I need to show up for them, but also they will show up for me. And then I just started realizing that I don't have to be perfect on that stage. I just need to be useful in some way.
I really, really appreciate that. And I will wrap by just saying this, and I really appreciate this. I always tell people, Elizabeth Herbert says this really well, and I kind of like gayify it up, but I say, perfectionism is fear and fancy footwear. And I say, and we ain't got no money, honey. Ship it. Like, it's really, really important. And I think the one thing that I love about you is I follow you on Twitter like it's my side hustle, religion, whatever have you. Like, I love your posts because you say it's not about developing a brand. I'm like, I hear you, but as someone that reports under marketing, but as a community builder at heart, it is a brand. And that's my pushback to you. You're saying it's not about brand, and I appreciate that, but that is your brand. Your brand is, from my perception, it's authentic, it's live, it's not perfect. And the most important thing, and this is my DMs with Jenny, is like, yes, queen, she's coming. You serve concrete examples. I love an aspirational story. I love an inspirational story, because an inspirational story is one that comes with concrete examples. I don't like aspirational. I like inspirational, just so we're clear. You serve concrete examples, and that's part of your brand. And so for anyone who's here today and whoever is like nervous about public speaking, you know, I'm a closeted introvert myself, and it's having people like you share their story and share concrete examples. I really admire that about you. I'm going to stop talking. I just want to say thank you. That's all.
I'm going to say that if you are thinking about public speaking, I do help people get started with that. So there's a thing called Tech Voices, and well, it to end up in my calendar automatically, and well, my availability is known to that little tool. So if there is times available, you're welcome to use them. So I know how to turn them off when I don't have time.
Tim, Maaret, you were the first person to ever give me feedback on a conference talk proposal, and it was wonderful. I highly suggest everyone avail themselves of this offer. Thank you.
I've done some mentoring with Tech Voices, and it's just really wonderful to help someone find their voice, because we all have a story to tell. We all have something worth sharing with the rest of the world. And if you don't think you do, we can pull it out of you.
Yes, we can.
So
you guys, because you ladies, sorry, I'll be contacting you because that's exactly what I need. I'm actually not afraid of public speaking, because when you're a business major, you just kind of do it. And I've been in enough positions where I've done it. But it's this particular field that I have become passionate about that makes me nervous, because it is so important to me at this point, you know? So I want to be sure that whatever I do, it is thoughtful and it is valuable. So that's that.
And again, having been to multiple conferences and well, quite many, too many, and heard many presentations, and some that have, you know, gems amongst things that maybe weren't relevant for me in that moment. I do have some kind of a frame of reference that I can help people with on you know, what's new and what's easy and what's difficult, and getting that second perspective into what you were thinking of sharing, it's usually a good thing to search for, even for someone who has a lot of experience in public speaking.
and small meetups like this are a great place to practice. Like anytime any of you, whoops. I just
Great
spoke
example,
public this
Jen.
time. Anytime any of y'all want to present at a meetup or practice a conference talk or, you know, workshop something, hit a girl up. I love this stuff.
And to your point too, Jenny, too, and I just posted that link in there, like for LinkedIn, this is something I really care about. I was talking to a leader at a big company, and they were saying, you know, hey, I'd really like to brainstorm with you. Like, I've been having a lot of like speakers cancel. I'm wondering if that's your experience. And so we kikied, and I was like, I'm sorry, I've never had that problem. And the reason why I haven't had that problem is because I don't just focus on big names like our current speaker, who is a really, really, really big deal and a celebrity. And we all just need to take a moment to say, like, the Queen is with us. This is a big deal. Like, this is a big deal. So
like she was saying, you need kindness, and kind people do their best not to cancel, even if sometimes they need to.
Correct. And I think the one thing is, like, it's also a testament to you that you are a human Rolodex of kind people. Your network, your connections, the voices that you elevate is a testament to you, Jenny Bramble.
Thank you.
And it's really appreciated. Like, it's like if Jenny endorses this, I'm there. Like, I'm there. Like, that's the
100% true story. Never has there been a better role for somebody in our organization than this one.
I learned that from Maaret, actually. Suffered no fools.
Mm, mm. And I think the other part of it too is that I told this meetup organizer, I told her, I said, stop focusing on the big names. Boo boo, you ain't running conferences.
Talk to your
lead?
community.
Exactly.
If your community has something to give to you, take from your community and then give back to them.
And yes, and focus on rising leaders, first-time speakers. Don't focus on all the big names, except this current live event, because you're a big deal and I'm really glad you're here. It's don't focus on the big names. You're not freaking, I'm really monitoring myself, y'all, because I curse like a sailor.
Thank you.
Really, you're welcome. It's recording. I know. I work with kindergartners sometimes, so I get it.
We don't call
bottom line-
PMs kindergartners.
We don't call what?
We don't call product people kindergartners.
We do not. That would be terrible. Not an example at all. Quality is everyone's responsibility. But my bottom line is focus on those rising leaders. And I posted this because the rising leaders are the ones that are not burdened by years of brand representation. They're not the ones that are like, oh, well, you said this in this talk. Rising leaders are the ones that don't have any of this at stake. And guess what? They're the ones providing the most innovative solutions to scale quality and automation across teams. They don't have anything to lose. They are, I'm not going to say the next generation, because if someone says that, I will murder them. They are, rising leaders is not a young person. It's anyone. You can be 40, you can be 50, you can be 60. It's someone who is fresh to the game, has not shared their voice, and has an innovative way to do that. And I put a podcast below. Yes, I work at Testum. God bless America. Daryl works at Mabel. I love Daryl. It's not about that. It's about people. It's about people. It's people first and foremost. And the story in the podcast I put below is this fresh leader who's never shared a story publicly, has 15 developers on his team. He makes his developers do manual testing. It's such a good story. And he never would have shared his voice. Stage mom here, I don't care. But the bottom line is focus a light on rising leaders.
Sorry to come in. I feel like I'm crashing here, but I'm crashing from Ireland. But Tristan, you were just saying there that there's a team leader who makes his developers do manual testing. Do you really mean that he makes them?
Correct.
I mean, that for me sounds counterintuitive.
Listen to the podcast would be my advice for you. Please listen to the podcast and connect with me on LinkedIn. I put my LinkedIn there as well below. I would love to hear your feedback because it really is a really, really, really great story. And for me, first and foremost, it's about a queer, fierce leader who commands the respect through kindness. Okay. Listen to the podcast and you'll understand because, yeah.
I'm seeing a LinkedIn on the chat, but I'm not seeing the podcast.
I'll send you the podcast again. It's honestly one for anyone to check out.
Oh, I do see it now.
I would love for you to listen to this. It's a new and innovative way that I think that like, this is why we highlight rising voices because he came from a retail background. I come from a social worker background. I fell into test automation and community management, and he came from retail and he came in here. It's a really interesting story, and they're really innovating their products. I would take a look at it, and I'm more than happy to introduce the two of you because that's what I love to do. So I'd love to connect the both of you. He's in Israel, so the timing I think would work out really well. He's just a good dude. He's my boo. We kiki today to celebrate his podcast. I love this guy.
Okay, it's interesting. Thank you. I was going to ask Maaret something that was sort of bubbling around in my head, which is when you were talking earlier about exploratory testing, and I think there was mention earlier of when people are being interviewed and people speak about how it's used in their teams. there's two things that I wanted to mention about that. And one is that recently when I've been hiring, I've seemed to hear on several different occasions with different candidates, it was almost like it was candidates thinking that they were saying that they were telling me what I wanted to hear, which was that they thought that I wanted to hear that they would do, when I was asking them about exploratory testing, that they did exploratory testing in a special phase during the sprint. They did exploratory testing sort of towards the end, just before they released at the end of the sprint, that this was their special exploratory testing slot. And that it was quite expensive, and more often than not, it might get cancelled because everything was, they were under a lot of pressure, so exploratory testing got binned. But that was when they did it. And from my point of view, it felt like they had taken exploratory as a term, and it had become so overloaded that what they were describing wasn't what I would call exploratory at all. To me, exploratory is it is the way that I do testing, and it's something that I want to see infused throughout my team. And I wouldn't dream of suggesting that we have a special time for it, and I wouldn't dream of saying that it's an extra sort of that it's something which can be I suppose removed at the end of the sprint because we're under so much pressure that's a luxury. So I wonder if this is something that's happening in many companies, that they feel they should be seen to be doing exploratory testing, so they call something exploratory testing, and then people feel that they can say that they're doing it, and it's become very distorted.
Yes,
is that something that you've come across?
it is. That particular brand of distortion is something I attribute to the testing quadrants popularized by Agile testing book.
Okay.
So putting exploratory testing in one of the corners and saying your testing isn't complete unless you also have this. So again, there's the ISTQB way of misunderstanding it. There's the Agile testing way of misunderstanding it. There's the it's now deprecated way of misunderstanding it. Or we can say it's just, all of these are different understandings. We need to add labels around them so that we can make sense of them. So kind of like, when we had guitars, we needed to introduce acoustic guitar as a label for the original guitar because we got the electric guitar. So now we have, like we have the 80s version of exploratory testing, we have the 90s version of exploratory testing. And probably we have a couple of different brands of exploratory testing going around. And I don't think we will get to one single brand, but we will need to have conversations on the meaning of what does that actually give to people and how it changes the way they test. Rather than that, again, you take the Agile testing book and it gives you a place for exploratory testing. And the place is for the surprises that no other techniques could find. And it's a very different place than where I put it in the, we have a similar way of thinking as far as I hear from here. So yeah, it's a very different one.
Yeah, I find more often than not that the conversations about exploratory testing can go around in circles.
Yes.
And that very often people from outside testing just they have this view that, we don't need to talk about it in these terms. We know what we want to achieve from testing. We don't have to give it that name, or we don't have to fight and struggle for a label. We know what we want to achieve from this, and so I sort of wonder if it will eventually, it will become exploratory with a small e instead of exploratory with a large e, and the exploratory with a large e is a word that has too many meanings for too many people. It has too many meanings in different contexts.
There will definitely be multiple meanings for that particular word, just like for any other words. I was talking about CD today, like I was just using the continuous delivery, CD this, CD that, and someone was asking me, why am I talking about compact discs? And I was like, I didn't even think about it anymore. That yes, it does have this secondary meaning as well, and every single word, like it's again like there's the whole world inside a person's head that you're talking to, and you can't change the fact that we'll understand things differently. There's no words, like there's no vocabulary that will remove that. It's a human to human. Let's spend enough time together to understand when it makes sense to talk about this.
Okay.
And for me, the where it makes sense to talk about contemporary exploratory testing is particularly in organizations that don't yet understand that it's not about the test cases. It's not about separating the automation testers and the manual testers. And it's not about following kind of a weird template in how you put your tasks in sprints. And a lot of times, instead of talking about the overall bigger concept, I go into the smaller nitty-gritty details, like simple things like the idea that there's two kinds of tasks that you put in your sprint backlog. There are time box things, basically work that gets done when the time runs out, and most of testing is that kind. And then there's the work that continues until it's done. And most of the programming work is that kind. You have to have a solution until and then you're finished. And making space, understanding kind of how you move things around, what's reusable, what's one-time task. Like there's so much detail to talk about just in how we organize the work, how we visualize it, that you don't really need to have the conversation on the kind of high level on this is exploratory testing, but you go into the what would it look like in every single practice that we have, so that we make space for learning and empiricism. Basically, it's empirical thing that you're doing testing. You're not trusting whatever plans you had. You spend time on seeing what's real. So it's the words won't help us. We need more words rather than less words. This has been maybe my theme for the last 10 years or so. I got very tired of being corrected on my word at some point, and I felt like I wasn't allowed to talk about stuff because I would say the wrong word. I didn't know that something was deprecated or something, whatever the thing was. And it took me quite some time to realize that it's actually a silencing technique. And if you ever see me doing that, which you will see, please call out, that bad behavior. I do not want to do it. I still recognize that I sometimes do. It is so well modeled in the world that it's hard habit to get rid of.
Right. So it's when you say a silencing technique, because there is so much sort of baggage around these things. So
I wrote an article saying that having testers makes it worse. The title was something of this sort, very flashy title. And some people never opened the article and looked at what it said within the article. They just kind of already went around in the social media in various places talking about how wrong I must be. The testing never makes things worse, and actually it does. A lot of times it does make things worse. So I find that in the world that is this hectic, we jump to conclusions and we jump to correct. You know,
Yeah.
someone's wrong on the internet, let's go and fix that.
Yeah.
It's still a prevalent way of thinking.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question.
Just jump into the conversation.
I would never. How dare you? You know, one of my favorite people, Maya Angelou, I spirit flip this book all the time. For anyone, you need to buy this. But I just flip through it and I Bible flip and I'm like, pick a number. And then we like find a Maya Angelou quote. But I bring this up to you is that in your comment just now, there's this idea that Maya Angelou says it's don't call people out, call them in. And so what does that look like for you as a leader? Because you are very vocal on social media. You are very, very, very public. And, you know, I talked about this in a recent podcast that I was interviewed for. And it's in our industry, there is a lot of cynicism. There is a lot of skepticism. There are people whose last names start with a B that I will not mention, but because it's being recorded, exactly. So what do you do to, as a leader, to not call people out, but call them in this way that you were just describing? What does that look like?
It's a really hard question.
I know, but you're one of the smartest people I know, so I think you can handle this.
You know, the flattery don't get you anywhere here.
Oh, it gets you a lot of places. It got this meetup.
No, it didn't. This meetup is because Jenny said, I am overwhelmed and I need speakers. Can someone make my life easy? That's how you get speakers.
We love honesty. We love kindness.
Yeah. So again, this whole kind of calling out versus calling in, maybe it's more on the side of noticing that I am, even if I don't want to be, on some kind of a pedestal. I'm noticing there are things where I can do stuff that my sister, who just started in the industry a little over 6 months ago, can't do. And I need to talk about this idea that none of my advice will work for you unless you first get the status. Maybe calling out is actually what you need to do for me. And maybe calling in is what I need to do for the others. So it might be just kind of this attention to the status. I used to think somehow that if my sister did the same things as I did, she could get some of the things, you know, done in a different way. But when you are new to the industry, you won't get away with the same things as you do at this point of career.
Yeah, I agree. I find there's a sort of, with every new job, there's a kind of a slow climb in terms of credibility, earning some credibility before you can sort of speak with some authority, and it's hard.
And public speaking gives you some of that credibility when you go into a new job. So that's also one of the reasons that's not why I started public speaking. I started public speaking because I'm socially awkward. It's difficult for me to go into a conference and go and talk to a stranger. I need to feel they want to talk to me before I'm comfortable. After that, no problems. But in a conference, when they're having their own conversation and I have no clue if they want to talk to me at all, I had no way of making that connection. That's what started making me go into conferences to speak. I could go on that stage, I could talk about stuff that I cared for, and then people came to me and everything was fine. This did last, well, it lasted long, but it no longer works. Now people think I'm busy for some weird reason of, I'm not that busy. Like I
And
have
you're
plenty
a
of
big
time.
deal. You're a celebrity. We all have time. You're a big deal. You're a celebrity. To anyone who's watching this recording, this is a big deal that she's here.
This is not a big deal.
It is, but that's me as an audience.
You know, it's a big deal that I'm here. I get to spend time with you. So that's, you know, big deal for me. It's again like a weird idea that when you've been doing this for some time and you have some ideas and you dare to say your opinions now out loud, and some people, you know, listen to you on a regular basis, that I would actually do that for that audience. Like I'm actually writing my notes in public.
Yeah.
That's what I do on Twitter. I
Yeah.
am not talking to you. I'm talking to myself. It might appear as if some of that resonates with some people, but I'm actually just making notes for myself, trying to make sense in the world as I'm experiencing it. And it's a really weird experience for those people who work with me in the same organization. They say that even though I don't actually say anything about what's going on at office, knowing what goes on at office and see what I write makes the connections so that everyone understands the organization a little better. So that's a weird phenomenon, but that's what I basically do. I connect my inner world based on what's going on right now, and I make notes of that.
In your brilliant brains, I promise it's my last question. This is my last question. Famous last words for Tristan Lombard, and I love everyone, so please chime in. My previous question that I wanted to wait for anyone else was, in your inner brilliant brain, there are, you know, I come from a recovering social worker that fell into test automation community management. So like for me, it's always been about people 100%. I'm not brand new to this for-profit scheme anymore. Like I've worked at Sauce Labs and I love all the amazing people there. The one big thing that I've learned has always been, how do you articulate from a business perspective? Because at the end of the day, we know the industry that we live in, and we see a disproportionate amount of white men in power that control budgets. And I always said, as someone who scaled our DEI program at Sauce Labs around the world for 13 months, I said, you have to speak to money. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to software quality. It's how are you, this is a long-winded way of saying, what is a concrete example that you can share for how you showed a quick win, aka Penny Howard, she talked about this, small wins for big changes, lightning talk, Jenny Bramble's there as well. But how do you share a concrete example of a small win prioritizing exploratory testing and what it delivers for the people that are using your products?
So how do I share that to management so that they?
Yes, because they're the ones with the dollars, and that's what matters for people. Yeah.
So for me, I have the benefit of having the management's ear in a very unusual way in my current organization. I get to meet with a quite high-level director, the one that is on top of all the development organization, once a month. He asked for it. He said he wants to meet me once a month after I joined the company, and we've been keeping it up for a year now. And he says he wants to continue because, you know, he gets some perspective out of that. So I have no advice on how to get to that point. I never before got to that point. So something went right in the recruiting. I think it's something my manager did in kind of like sponsoring me in a way that would be unusual. But what I do a lot more on the level of the project that I work with, which has 12 subsystems that we, by the way, released today, or actually yesterday, it's already next day. Finally, we're done with that system, and now we can do continuous. I'm looking forward to that. But with that, kind of like, you know, on the day-to-day basis, I tell stories. Like, oh, I'm so excited about a thing that happened today. And then I tell a little story. So showing up in places and being authentically excited about something interesting that is happening, that shows through a story that is meaningful in the creation of your product, that what we're doing is taking us to the right place. Less of the negative and more of the positive and reinforcing with stories. That's my advice.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that. I think that's something like coming from community, I always joke, I run our community on Slack. I run private channels as well to like continuously deliver live events where our people that are using our product can share their influence live in inclusive and equitable spaces with our devs and product leaders. But I also run a slew of other programs. And I have to say, the number one thing that I always tell people who are looking to launch a community, and I think this applies in this principle here, is you have to continuously push for visibility. It's our end of quarter, and there was a lot of hustle, and I had some fun words with the sales leader. And people were like, well, Tristan, you don't need to hear that for you. And I said, no, it's not about me. It's about the community. And if I am not the number one advocate for the community, who will be? And so you have to be visible, relentless. And I think that's the same thing in what you're doing is, how are you creating a story about how this impacts the business? And how are you being a ruthless advocate? Former social worker, so here we go. How are you being a ruthless advocate for this? It's about speaking outside of yourself and advocating for those people. What I love about our software testing community is that it has always been about people. It has always been about people. It is not about the latest test automation solutions that can achieve that. It's about putting the people first and foremost that are driving those solutions and making it visible and making it an articulate story. So I just want to say thank you for continuing to make that such a focus of your career, and for all of us here, specifically around exploratory testing, because it's a personal passion project of mine. So I really appreciate this. I do think automation plays a play, and that's why I'm really grateful that we had this conversation today, and you and I kikied about this offline. So like seeing this talk happen today just like filled my queer heart with joy.
I just, thinking of this advice that I just gave on being positive. For me, energy of being positive for the managers comes from having a lovely community of women in testing, where I can be as negative as I need to be for a safe audience, and they're always there for me. So I, lots of love that direction.
Correct.
Yeah.
All right, y'all, we're getting a little bit close to time here, so I'm gonna go ahead and call it. She's available online. I need to grab dinner. I do want to let everybody know we are having another meetup this month, because this was technically our March meetup. It's going to be April 22nd, and the lovely and talented Susan is going to be speaking on developing your career as a tester, and this is something she's been working with recently, so it's going to be really, really wonderful. Cool. Thank you all for coming to TSQA tonight. I appreciate every one of you, especially you, Maaret. Thank you for all the wonderful conversation, and I will see you on the internet.
Definitely.
It was nice to see you all. Thank you all.
Sleep well, Maaret.
Night, everyone.
Thank you, Maaret.
Bye.